Merry Christmas, Anjem Choudary, the radical fundamentalist, has been handed £2 million of taxpayers' money to assist him in attempting to get out onto the streets of Britain to spread even more hate and bile than he did before. Hello everyone, this is Andre Walker. Thanks so much for watching this video. Please do subscribe, but more importantly, hit the bell notification icon. It's the best way to absolutely guarantee you get all my videos as soon as they are released. Well, on this channel, I've talked loads of times about Tommy Robinson and said that I'm not really interested in his background as a mortgage fraudster or somebody who's committed immigration offences. I'm much more interested in finding out whether he's telling the truth. And also, I'm interested in something else, which is, at the same time as the Bedfordshire police were raiding Tommy Robinson every single week in order to find a reason to lock him up, they were at the same time talking about a man called Anjem Choudary and saying that they were unable to do anything with him because it breached his human rights. Remarkable double standard. But of course, we haven't talked very much on this channel about Anjem Choudary, born in South London in the late 1960s, mid to late 1960s. He originally started as a medical student, but in the end studied law at Southampton. And there's that very famous picture of him with a porn mag and a pint of cider. But he soon went off the sins of the Western flesh and fell under the spell of Omar Mohammed Bakri, a radical hate preacher. And he has dedicated his life, it's fair to say, to attempting to bring down the Western world. He once called for the Queen to be forced to wear a burqa. He said that Sharia law should be brought in to the United Kingdom. And in 1996, he set up Al-Muhajirun. Now, some of you may not know what Al-Muhajirun is. I first came across them when I was on the committee of the Young Conservatives of Greater Manchester. And basically what happened was, I was walking down Oxford Road in Manchester, and there was these people giving out leaflets at a little trestle table. And the event was called A Towering Day in History. And it had pictures of the World Trade Center attack, and it was advertising an event where people were going to say how marvellous that attack was and how, it was, well, a towering day in history. And I just couldn't believe what I was reading. I initially thought it was a joke, but actually it was deadly serious. These people were, they sort of had all the expert level gear on and all this sort of stuff. And that was Al-Muhajirun. By the way, the story does have a happy ending, slightly, because I said to them, oh, guys, if I were you, I'd take your trestle table and get lost. And they went, no, mate, we've got a right to be here. We can do whatever we want. I said, it's not about your legal right to be here. It's that I'm the vice president of the Young Conservatives in Greater Manchester, and they've all been in the pub for about 6 hours, and they're coming this way. Believe me, you don't want to come across 30 of these blokes when they're beard up and you saying all that stuff about the United States of America. Anyway, they didn't take my advice, but the lads came out of the pub. I'll tell you what, they moved that trestle table relatively quickly. But here is the critical point. Anjem Choudary, in the end, was sentenced to 28 years. He's been in and out of prison loads of times. And what they said was this. Al-Muhajirun was banned. Then he changed the name to Islam for UK. That was banned as well. Prescribed terror groups. And of course, he then began preaching on this online discussion group. Now, there's this amazing piece of work between the Canadians, the NYPD and the Brits, which infiltrated this online group. And that was why Anjem Choudary was prosecuted. And what did they say about him? They said that 90% of those people who were involved in some sort of an Islamic fundamentalist attack on Britain or were British were linked in some way to Anjem Choudary. So this man, whilst he says, oh, I'm only interested in words and I'm only interested in preaching, he is at the apex of all of it. And he gets 28 years. Well, anyway, his lawyers are now saying that that is excessive. They've said, we know people who've had a double life sentence who've got less than 28 years. Well, actually, I don't think it's excessive at all. And apparently Anjem's very upset. Oh, poor him, after all the hatred and bile that he has spilt out across the world. But he's now been given legal aid to challenge the sentence. Now, I said that he would receive $2 million from the taxpayer. In fact, I'll be honest with you, that is a guess. But I'll tell you, I won't be far wrong, because initially he'll go to the lower court, then he'll go to the Supreme Court, then he'll go to Strasbourg. Filing a case in Strasbourg can cost anything from £1 to £3 million, and it's all on you, the British taxpayer. And what upsets me more than anything else, this man turns round and says that Job Seekers Alliance, JSA, he actually called it Jihad Seekers Allowance, and he said that, in fact, it was the duty of every Muslim in Britain to bleed off the British state and instead fight to bring down the country. I will say one thing. The vast majority of British Muslims can't stand him and don't agree with what he's saying. I just want to make that very, very clear. But let's talk about the human rights legislation that Mr. Choudary is soon going to benefit from, because I bet you he'll win and it'll cost us a load of money. Right, we've always been told, well, Levi Belfield, you've got to let him have his wedding in prison. You've got to give all these IRA guys compensation. You've got to let Choudary go on legal aid because those human rights rules that give rights to the people that we don't like are the reason that you've got human rights. Well, first of all, that's simply not true. We had a long history in Britain of having human rights before the Human Rights Act came in and before the European Convention on Human Rights was signed. In reality, the period since Britain incorporated the Human Rights Act into UK law, there's been the greatest diminution of human rights ever in British history. And I'll tell you why. Because when Winston Churchill came up with the idea of the European Convention on Human Rights, he wants to protect the individual from an overbearing government. But that has been flipped on its head by people like Keir Starmer and the Matrix Chambers. So now it's about the government forcing its opinions upon you. Its opinions on uncontrolled immigration, its opinions on hate crime, its opinions on free speech. All of that now is turned to you. So whilst human rights legislation was intended to protect your human rights, actually, it is the number one thing that's violating it. And let's give you a prime example. Because, we've got to give Anjem his rights because that's what keeps us our rights. Well, hang on a second. What about my right to free assembly that disappeared during COVID? What about my right not to be discriminated against on the grounds of on the grounds of medical illness thrown away during COVID? What about my right to a fair trial? I was put under house arrest, as were you, during COVID. Where was all this human rights legislation when my rights evaporated? And what are we talking about with Anjem Choudary? We are talking about the most important radical hate preacher in Britain being given time out of prison to continue to spread his bile. And yet human rights legislation doesn't prevent the government from locking you up in your own home, from sticking signs on doors saying you can't come in here unless you've had an injection, a coronavirus injection, or you can't come in here if you test positive for an illness, or if you come out to protest against the coronavirus lockdown, you're going to be arrested for being on the protest. Where were our human rights then? It is absolute garbage. This human rights legislation is protecting the bad people while supplying us with absolutely nothing. And think about this Christmas, the number of people who'll be working hard in order to put food on the table. I always say that I'm a big believer in Father Christmas, simply because I think that Father Christmas is the greatest gift, or one of the greatest gifts, that the adults of this country give to the children of this country. Everybody's involved to some extent. And I actually think if children knew the truth about Father Christmas, they'd be even more impressed and even more in awe than the lie, because actually the truth is far more mystical and amazing than what they're given as the official story. But think about all those people working incredibly hard, and Anjem Choudary walks off with his sack full of money, having done the damage that he's done to this country, having done the harm he's done to this country, having spread the bile and evil that he has spread. Is that what we've become as a nation? A safe haven for the bad people, where the good people are pushed into the floor, who have to work every single day to raise the money to ensure the bad people can live it up on legal aid? You know, this man is an absolute nightmare, and somebody who, frankly, I'd have let the Americans have him like we did with Abu Hamza. They wouldn't have been mucking about in the way that we muck about. But where is the fairness of any of this? I don't think there is any fairness. And Anjem Choudary has played and worked the system his entire life, and he continues to do it. And you continue to be the idiots that pay the bill. And oh, by the way, I was going to say, well, my Talk TV show, I always get into trouble from the bosses for calling the viewers and listeners idiots. But when I say that, I'm calling myself an idiot as well. Because we're the mugs. Why is it that it's us that constantly have to pay for all this? Why doesn't Anjem Choudary, phone his fundo mates and get the money from them? No, of course not. What is the cost of the Shamima Begum situation? She's run up bills like there's no tomorrow. And this Matrix Chambers, where Keir Starmer was a barrister and where the new Attorney General came from, that represents all of these people, they are making off like bandits. They're absolutely loaded. Keir Starmer's got, what, a £4 million house just off being a barrister. And by the way, there's not many self-made people have a £4 million house. It's a remarkable thought about the way that these barristers take the mick out of this country. And the reality is the Tony Blair incorporation of the Convention of Human Rights into UK law has done nothing other than support the bad people, nothing other than enrich the lawyers that hate us, nothing other than cost you extra in taxes and offer you no protection whatsoever from the omnipotence of the government. We need to stop giving the government power. We need to stop handing the bad guys like Anjem Choudary sacks full of money. That is the problem that's taking place in our country. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I do want to show you one thing very, very quickly. As I step off camera, let me show you my 100,000 subscriber plate, whatever you want to call it. And I just want to say thank you so much to all of you that have helped me with this. It's been a great thing to come back to YouTube. As you know, I had a channel before and it did reasonably well, but this one has been a real phenomenon. And thank you so much for all of your support. I really appreciate it. Please do comment, subscribe and hit the bell notification icon. Until next time, goodbye.